Hi, I'm Colin. This is my garage. I was looking at the calendar the other day thinking I had all this time, and it's September. So I've got to get cracking because I'm only about halfway done this guitar, at least in the video series. The guitar is actually done. It's been done for about a month. You don't get to see pictures yet. That's spoilers. You have to wait until the last video. But I do need to get these videos out. I've got all the footage, and I just need to get cracking. So let's get started with this one anyway. The body is glued together, and I'll start by trimming the top and back. Because of the guitar's curvature, I had to make these cauls so I could slide the guitar around on the flat router table. Here I'm just trimming the top and back flush with the sides. Then I'll clean up the sides and move on to cutting the binding channels. But first I'll inlay this end graft. After my last video, a few people asked about this sander. It's homemade. It's made with some threaded rod and nuts and washers that you can buy at the hardware store, and some skateboard bearings inside the handle. I made the handle just out of a piece of scrap wood, and then the sandpaper is on an arbor from my spindle sander. This is a little jig I made to route the binding channels on the guitar. The channels need to be square to the sides and not the top and back of the guitar. That makes it easier to glue the binding in nice and tight. And this jig allows you to do that. This is my first time using it though, and it was pretty nerve-wracking. I'm bending the walnut binding for the back. These may look crooked, but what I've done already off camera is I've bent them to the profile of the sides, because when I put them on the guitar, they're going to have to bend vertically downwards, not just around the shape of the body, but also down. So it's sort of a three-dimensional bend I need to steam into them. So I've started with the profile, and now I move on to the actual shape because they're still straight, as you can see. To attach the wood binding, I used a method where you tape it into the channel dry and get it as tight as you can, and then you drip super glue in and let the super glue soak in and glue it in that way. And then once that you've done the whole binding that way, you take the tape off and then you fill any gaps with super glue that you missed. You can see I have the two binding strips meeting off center as well. This makes it a lot easier to hide that joint. You still have to do a good job and to make it a nice clean joint. But if it's not right there in the center, then the eye isn't drawn to it at all. Next, I'm routing the neck pocket. I made a little mistake in order of operations here. Before routing the neck pocket, I put the walnut binding in, and I should have left it, because once I had the walnut binding in, I had to clean up the sides and the back of the guitar so that it would sit properly in the curved mold so that I could route the neck pocket. But now I still have to put the top binding in and then clean up the sides again, which has to happen after I route the neck pocket. So next time, neck pocket first, then all the binding. Well, the neck pocket is routed. This guitar design keeps challenging me. I keep having to make new jigs. This neck pocket template that I used, well, because the guitar is curved, I had to make these curved pieces for it to sit on. And then, of course, because the back of the guitar is curved, it has to sit in the curved mold. And so I have everything clamped lightly, just to make sure it doesn't move. And it worked out! There's a couple burn marks in there, but it's nice and clean on the edges. So. Now for the top binding. I'm using different binding here than on the rest of the guitar, and that's just for aesthetic reasons. You'll see later when I do the finishing. I'm using a different technique here with the plastic binding. I'm taping it in dry and then soaking in acetone in the gaps. The acetone actually melts the plastic, and the plastic will adhere itself to the wood. One last time with a side sander. The guitar body is effectively finished now, so the cleanup I'm doing now is basically in preparation for finishing. Moving on to the fretboard. I made this jig to make it easier to cut fret slots. The saw rides between bearings, and that keeps the slot straight. And then the top ridge of the saw, as you cut the slot, it will go down and touch those top bearings, and that controls the depth of the slots. I'm going to bind this fretboard, and here I'm just cleaning up the sides in preparation for gluing. This looks more complicated than it is. I'm just trying to keep everything flat and straight while I glue on the fretboard binding. Here I'm cutting fret markers out of some maple binding strips. Here I'm sanding a radius into the fretboard. I have this jig just to make sure everything stays straight. So the fretboard's basically done. Now I need to make the neck. That clamp is just holding a piece of wood there for support to keep the neck square to the bandsaw table. Here I'm trimming the headstock overlay. It's a piece of maple to match the top of the guitar. I need to sand the correct angle into the headstock overlay so it'll match up with the nut. I'm using this small angle template. This is the same one I used to mark the scarf joint on the neck. So this will make sure the angle is correct. That piece of wood is the same thickness as the nut, so I'm just using it to align everything. I'm just drilling some holes for locating pins. Here I'm routing the truss rod slot. And now again, I'm drilling holes for locating pins. This is what happens when all you have is a bunch of old silicone tubes and they've sat and dried out for 2 years. So you have to cut the top off to get at the stuff. The silicone seal acts as a damper to keep the truss rod from buzzing in its slot while you're playing the guitar. You can see the locating pins if you look close. They're just brad nails. This will keep the fretboard in place while I glue it up. Here I'm trimming the neck on the bandsaw. Then I'll move to the router and I'll use the fretboard as a guide to trim the neck to its final shape. Not quite the final shape, I still have to carve the neck, of course. Now I'm using the spindle sander to fit the neck to the body. Once I have it almost there, I'll use some sandpaper and hand sand it to get it just right. Well, it's starting to look almost finished, but there's still a lot of work to do. In the next video, I'll carve the neck and finish it up, and then I'll move on to finishing. I'm going to try a burst finish on the top of this guitar, and also an interesting sort of grain filling procedure on the back. And I'm kind of excited about that, so I'm looking forward to showing that to you in the next video. Thanks for watching.